So hey guys, hope you guys are doing well. And today I'm going to be walking through the Lab Performance and Recovery Center. And I picked the lab because it's probably one of the most locally relevant competitors for us to understand. It's not just some random business in another state or even another part of California, but it's actually in Temecula, which makes it relevant to the market Revive 7 would be entering. And what makes a lab interesting is that they're not just a recovery studio, but they're also various services such as a med spa, and so they're kind of somewhere in between. And they also combine recovery services, wellness, medical aesthetics, IV therapy, hormones, and just general provider supported services under one local brand. And I actually do think they do a lot well, and the goal is to understand what they prove about the local market, what parts of their model are strong, and where Revive 7 could still create a clearer lane. And so, why the business matters? The reason the lab matters is because it already gives us a local proof of concept. And a lot of the businesses we studied are helpful, but they each show a different piece of the market. Prevail HSR shows what a clean recovery first concept can look like. Training Lab shows what happens when you build a strong performance culture around athletes, conditioning, etc. But the lab is also different because it's local and hybrid, and it shows how recovery and medical wellness can be bundled in the same Temecula area business. And the story starts in 2016 by offering wellness treatments to athletes and the local public. And then in 2018, as you can see, they expanded through, I believe that's how you say Onyx, I think that's the pronunciation. And yeah, so they expanded through Onyx at the lab, which added more medical aesthetics and wellness infrastructure under physician oversight. And that timeline is important because it gives us a possible growth lesson that they didn't necessarily start at this fully built out hybrid medical wellness brand from day one. And it was more like it looks like they began with accessible wellness and recovery services, then in the future they layered in higher complexity services after there was more traction and after more money came. So for Revive 7, I think that's pretty useful because it suggests that the best launch strategy may not be to do everything at once, and it may be better to start with a clear core offer than if we prove demand, build trust, and then eventually we can expand to higher value services once the business has a lot of momentum going for it. And then for the public facing identity and the way the lab positions itself is interesting because it sits in the middle of the other businesses we've already looked at. Prevail HSR is very easy to understand immediately. It's more recovery first. And when you look at Prevail, the message is pretty simple. Just come here, for recovery, wellness, and it's pretty consumer friendly, clean, and easy to package. And then, the training lab, which is the third option, is very different. It's more performance driven, and their brand feels intense, athlete centered, and they have a fight camp identity, the testing language, the high performance environment, and the athlete credibility from famous UFC fighters. And their advantage is not just what they sell, but also the advantage is the culture that is cultivated around them. And the lab is somewhere in between. They use language like human performance, wellness, and recovery, and then they also talk about doctors, therapists, athletes, innovation, peak performance, and health optimization. So they are broader than Prevail, but they're not as culturally intense or as performance system driven as the training lab. And that what is ultimately what makes the lab useful to study. They're trying to combine recovery and wellness, medical wellness in a local Temecula setting, but the trade-off is that broad positioning can become harder to explain. And when a business touches wellness, aesthetics, all these services that they have, the customer might wonder, what is the main reason I should come here? And I think that's where Revive 7 has an opening. It can learn from the simplicity of Prevail Training Lab's culture and the lab's hybrid medical wellness model. But the I think the opportunity is to make the positioning more focused, which I think would be like a clinically guided sports medicine pathway that connects assessment, treatment, recovery, and performance. And the lesson from the slide is that breadth is valuable, but the customer still needs a simple story. And the lab proves a hybrid model can exist locally, and Revive 7 opportunity is to make that hybrid model easier to understand and more clearly tied to sports medicine and performance. And then, so for the service stack, this is where the lab becomes more interesting from a business model standpoint because they're not built around one service line. They're a recovery side and a medical wellness side, and both sides can feed into one another. So, on the lab recovery side, they offer things like whole body cryotherapy, infrared sauna, flow therapy, and other performance or recovery wellness services. And these are easier entry points. A customer they don't necessarily they don't they don't have to understand a full medical plan to try cryotherapy or sauna. They can just come in because they're sore or they're stressed or just recovering from training or even just curiosity in general. And then you have the Onyx side, which adds a different layer that includes IV therapy, blood analysis, medical aesthetics, hormone replacement therapy, body therapies, and testing. And that's where the model becomes more medically oriented and higher value. And so this is not just a one service business, it's a multi-entry business. And someone might first come in for cryotherapy, someone might first come in for Botox, someone might first come in for IV therapy, hormones, or blood work. And I think there is a the business model overall is strong in some ways because each entry point can lead to another service. But I think the challenge is that those services have to feel connected, otherwise the business can start to feel like a list of unrelated offerings. And that's where Revive 7 can study the model but improve the story. And Revive 7 could eventually have multiple services too, but the key would be making those services feel like part of one sports medicine recovery pathway and not just a broad menu of general wellness. And so for the credibility layer, I think this slide is important because it relates to Revive 7 and we have to be fair in how we analyze the lab. Is I wouldn't say the lab lacks medical legitimacy. The Onyx gives them a real medical wellness layer, and their site says Onyx joined forces with the lab in 2018, and it brought in medical aesthetics, hormone replacement therapy, and other medical services. And they listed Dr. Richard Rawson as a medical director and describe a registered nurse team. So the lab is already more credible than a basic retail recovery lounge, and a normal cryotherapy or sauna business usually cannot point to that kind of medical wellness infrastructure. But here's the nuance for Revive 7. The lab's medical credibility appears mostly tied to wellness, aesthetics, hormones, IV, laser, and testing. And what is less obviously publicly is a physician, physical therapist, and nurse team being used as a center of a sports medicine journey. And how this is now the question is how we as Revive 7 can separate itself. The differentiator is not just saying we have an MD. I think the stronger point is saying our clinical team guides the actual journey. So if a Revive 7 has, like, say, an MD, PT, and nurse involved, the combination becomes the core of the brand, and the MD can provide clinical direction, PT can provide movement, rehab, etc., and then the nurse supports wellness services, education, and procedures where appropriate, follow up, and even patient experience. And the customer pathways is this slide shows that the lab one of the lab's biggest strengths to give customers multiple ways to enter the business, and that could be cryotherapy, sauna, flow therapy. These are easy to understand and low friction, and sometimes can try them without feeling like they're committed to a full medical program. And then another person might enter through wellness optimization pathway. That could mean IV therapy, blood analysis, or hormones. And that customer is probably thinking about energy, fatigue, health optimization, etc. Or even another person, as you can see, they can enter through the aesthetic pathway. That could be Botox, skincare, laser, injectables. And this is a different customer motivation, but it could still bring them in the same ecosystem. And then you have the pain active lifestyle, which would be physical stress, sports recovery, chronic pain. And then the business inside is that the lab is not really relying on one hero service and has a network of entry points. But this is also where risk comes in, because when a business has many doors, it also needs a strong map, or otherwise the customer walks in and sees all these services at once and they feel scattered. So our lesson is Revive 7, multiple doors can work, but they need to lead into one clear journey. And then just looking at the pricing and revenue logic. So what we can do is use their public pricing to understand the mechanics of the business. For whole body cryotherapy, they'll list $65 for single session and 25 for first time clients. And then as you can see, they offer three packages, three sessions for 117, 5 for 170, 10 for 320, 20 for 600. So that means that they're using a trial to repeat model, and a customer can try it at a lower price, and then the business can move them into packages. And then you have the infrared sauna. It's $30, and then it goes to 4 for 99, 10 for 175, and 20 for 299. And they have unlimited options at 99 per week or 199 per month. And then the modeled examples show the basic mechanics. If they had 300 cryotherapy sessions per month at blended $40, that would be around 12,000 gross. And then 50 sauna unlimited members at $199 per month would be close to 10,000 gross. And then 200 sauna sessions per month at $20 to $30 would be around 4 to 6K gross. But the most important part is what the slide executes is it excludes a lot of like the Onyx services such as IV therapy, hormone replacement therapy, etc. But then it also excludes Botox, dermal filler, Juvederm, skin pen, etc. I did notice on their Instagram they do have different pricing, and a lot of those services don't have public pricing and are listed as call for pricing, which means that the revenue potential is harder to model from the outside. And these slides are the figures on this slide are probably, I would say, conservative, and the recovery services help us understand the entry point economics, but the higher ticket side is likely the bigger upside. And for the strengths, now what do they do well? They have strong local relevance. They're in Temecula, and this is not theoretical for Revive 7. They're already operating in the same broad market, and they have multiple revenue streams. They're not dependent on one service, one trend, etc. And they have a medical director and an RN team that increases credibility. And then they also have their recovery modalities that create accessible entry points. Cryotherapy and sauna are easy for people to understand, and they can bring in athletes, active adults, people with soreness. And fifth, Onyx adds higher value medical wellness and aesthetics, and that matters because the customer who comes in for simple recovery may later become a higher value wellness or aesthetics client. And then walk-in availability for some services lowers friction, and that matters a lot more than people realize. For example, if a business makes the first step too complicated, people may never come in, and the lab has services that people can understand and try quickly. And the lab is probably the closest local proof that we have that has a hybrid recovery and medical wellness model that can exist in Temecula. And for gap analysis and where the lab leaves room for Revive 7, the lab has a lot of strong pieces. They have broader recovery and wellness services. They have, as we know, medical wellness through Onyx. They have higher value services like HRT, IV therapy, etc. And they also have a local presence in Temecula. And the gap is clarity. I felt like from the outside, it's not always obvious what the main customer journey is. Is the main story recovery, or is it aesthetics? Is it hormones? Is it IV therapy? Is it PT? Is it performance? It can be all of those, but when everything is presented together, the brand can start to feel more like a broad menu than one coordinated system. They also clearly do not clearly own a physician, PT, and nurse-led sports medicine pathway. I feel like it's their whole business model is way too generalized, and they don't appear to emphasize a step-by-step rehab to performance model. It's just throwing a bunch of services together, and they don't have the same athlete community culture like the training lab has. Um, and they do not seem to have strong promote they do not seem to strongly promote measurable outcomes from intake to recheck. And I think this is the opening for Revive 7, because we should not try to win by adding more random services. We should win by making the services feel connected, and the lab has many of the pieces, and Revive 7 can differentiate by organizing those pieces into a clear medical and performance pathway. And Revive 7 can make MD plus PT plus nurse coordination the front door. And this slide is probably the clearest Revive 7 differentiation point, because the lab has medical oversight. And that is important to knowledge, but their medical side appears to be more connected to wellness, aesthetics, and testing, and even IV therapy or even hormones. And what is less obvious is a full sports medicine pathway where a physician, PT, and nurse are central to the customer's journey from the beginning. And that's what Revive 7 could potentially own. It's the differentiator is not simply we have a doctor, and it's a lot of wellness businesses. A lot of wellness businesses can say that they have a medical director, but the strong differentiator is how involved they are and how the team is used. So for Revive 7, the physician like Dr. Jordan Smith can guide clinical decision making and sports medicine direction. The PT can guide movement, rehab, return to training, etc. And the nurse can support IVs, injections, or procedures where appropriate, education, follow-up, and the day-to-day wellness experience. And that ultimately creates a much stronger story, and it turns the business from a list of services into a guided pathway. And it could be that pathway could be assess, treat, rehab, recover, perform, and maintain. And that's why the phrase from pain to performance works well. It tells the customer that the business is not just a recovery lounge, but it is also a wellness clinic. It's a place where the clinical team manages the patient and helps them move from a problem or limitation towards better function, better performance, and better recovery. And Revive 7, again, should borrow a lot from the lab. The lab shows a lot of shows that a local hybrid model is possible, and it shows that the value of low friction recovery services. It also shows the importance of medical credibility. It shows how higher value wellness services can sit next to more accessible entry services, and it shows that the Temecula market is already familiar with this general category. And Revive 7 should not copy the lab directly. The first thing is Revive 7 should improve positioning. The customer should be able to understand Revive 7 quickly. For example, the training lab, they make it very clear to their customers that this is sort of catered to the MMA community. And, if they took too long to explain, then their brand becomes harder to sell. And the second improvement is a stronger rehab to performance bridge. This is where the MD, PT, and nurse model matters, and Revive 7 can make the clinical team part of the actual customer journey. And the third improvement is a more unified patient journey, and instead of offering separate services, Revive 7 should make it clear why those services belong together. And then there are things to avoid, like Revive 7 should avoid looking like a random menu like them. It should also avoid launching too many complex services too early. It should avoid hiding the clinical team in the background. It should avoid being unclear about whether it's sports medicine, wellness, recovery, or aesthetics. And So the takeaway at the bottom says the lab proves that the market exists and Revive Seven's opportunities to organize the market better. And yeah, so this is the last slide, and the final slide is the main conclusion. As I think Revive 7 shouldn't copy the lab exactly, but the opportunities to take what the lab proves locally and make the model clearer, more coordinated, and more sports medicine driven. And the lab is one of the most relevant comparisons because it already operates in the overlap between recovery, aesthetics, hormones, etc. And it's also in Temecula, and it shows that Temecula can support a hybrid wellness and recovery model. And let me see how many followers, or how many reviews they have. They have around 392 reviews with a 4.9 rating, so they have a lot of traction. They have a lot of momentum, and they have also combined many different services. But I also do think Revive 7 can own a clear sports medicine identity, or even you want to even Revive 7 can make it MMA focused, just cater to a specific niche. I suggested like a more MMA. Um, yeah, so and I think the MD PT and nurse guided pathway is central to the brand, and it can create a true rehab to performance bridge, and it can track progress from intake to recheck, and it can build a stronger athlete and active adult culture, and it can launch with fewer services that are better connected instead of trying to offer everything immediately. And the way I would summarize this is that the lab has breadth and Revive 7 can win with clarity. And the lab shows that the local market exists, and Revive 7's opportunity is to build a version that feels more intentional, more coordinated, and more connected from the first visit all the way to long term performance. And yeah, so this is where we end. And if you guys have any questions or concerns, I'm more than happy to help. And there will be at least a few more case studies coming in the future. And yeah, thank you so much.